What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. And in today's video we're going to be doing another review roundup, and I love doing these. A lot of times if I see a brand new movie and I'm a little bit late to that initial review cycle, I like to kind of bunch it together with maybe some other films in that same series that I've yet to review here on the channel. Earlier this year, I ended up doing one with Blacktastic Media for the original Matrix, and so we won't be talking about that one here, but what I will say is I love that film. I honestly think it's one of the greatest films that's ever been made, one of the most iconic films that's ever been made, and is just a great sci-fi action film. And unfortunately, I don't necessarily share that exact same love for the next three that would come out in the series, with the most recent one being Resurrections, the one that everybody's talking about this week. So I figured it'd be time to just kind of do a quick wrap-up video on all of the Matrix sequels, starting with Reloaded, Revolutions, and then Resurrections. I will say that because of the fact that Reloaded and Revolutions came out literally just a few months apart in the exact same year and were filmed at the exact same time, I'm just going to go ahead and jam my thoughts on those two movies together really quickly right now, and then we'll move into Resurrections, which is the one that you guys definitely probably want to hear me talk about the most. So like I mentioned before, I'm a huge fan of the first film. I think it's a great movie and just one of the best sci-fi action films ever made. And you know, you have that iconic character of Neo being introduced, so many iconic lines specifically from that first film. And when I was revisiting it earlier this year, it was just such a great time to go back and watch, and it's still a really fantastic film. And so what I will say is I like this series, and each installment in this franchise has had some enjoyment in it for me without a shadow of a doubt. But moving into Reloaded and Revolutions, I think without a doubt, though there is a lot of conclusion to things that were set up from the first film, there are things that pay off and there are some epic moments of action. I find them to be two films that always lose me just a little bit in the way that it chooses to present its story. Of course, we're getting the continuation to the story from the first film, and we're getting to see, you know, Neo kind of proving himself to be the one who will stop this war between the humans and the machines. And yeah, you know, it's definitely an interesting story to see unfold. But I think without a doubt, what pulls me out of the second and third film for me is the almost over the top, really just unnecessary, very intelligent dialogue that they try to have, very dense dialogue that seems like it's trying to be overly clever. Now, it's definitely something that's able to be followed. It's not something that you're sitting there watching it and just thinking, I can't follow what's happening. You know, it's very clever, it's very well put together, but there is an element of feeling like it's overly dense for no real reason. There's an element of it feeling like it's trying to impress you in the way that its dialogue is put together, and even though you may be able to follow along with what's going on, I feel like there's a certain point in moments when I'm watching both Reloaded and Revolutions where I'm thinking to myself, I have just lost interest in what's going on just because of the way that the story is being presented for me here. Now, without a doubt, I have to say that Reloaded and Revolutions have some of the best action in the series, and I literally just watched Resurrections right before turning the camera on, and I will say that that definitely still stands true for me. I think Reloaded and Revolutions have some of the best action in the series, with really iconic moments, both visually and just in some of the moves that are happening, and overall, I think that they're also really entertaining films to watch. With that said, where it does lose me, like I mentioned before, is in a lot of the dialogue, and because of that, I find myself bored in a lot of the story progressions. Now, with that said, like I said earlier, there are moments that are just so epic because you're getting conclusion to things that were set up. So there is payoff for so much of what's been set up from the first film, things that are set up in the second film, and that do conclude in the third film. And so without a doubt, I would say out of the second and third, I think Revolutions is the one I enjoyed the most, mainly because you were getting a conclusion to what was set up before it, where Reloaded sometimes feels like it's just kind of overly dense for no reason. Even though Reloaded has phenomenal action sequences, there's an element of it feeling just kind of muddled at times and a little bit messy. And I feel the same way about Revolutions, to be completely honest, but I think it's a little bit more focused in trying to wrap up the story, so at least it feels like there's some sort of payoff to everything you've seen up to this point. But what I will say is, even though I have some of these negatives in there, you know, being able to binge the second, third, and fourth right now, like leading into the fourth, was a lot of fun. I had a good time being able to do that, even though I was able to kind of recognize that I still am never able to just 100% connect to the story, connect to the characters, just because of the way that, again, the dialogue is presented in the second and third film. But I think that Keanu Reeves is phenomenal in the role as Neo. You have Carrie-Anne, you have Laurence Fishburne. I mean, there's so many phenomenal people in these films. Hugo Weaving is so good in the second and third film, and just the chemistry between him and Keanu Reeves in that third film leading up to that final battle is so good. Those sequences are so great, and I still really enjoy his performance as Agent Smith. That final battle in and of itself is just so great, and I think that Keanu Reeves and everybody else that's part of the cast of the main characters specifically all do a phenomenal job. And I specifically want to say main characters because something that I think I also don't like about the second and third film is there is an element of feeling like it just has way too many characters, and you kind of forget that certain characters are even involved in what's going on. One thing I want to mention that I kind of really couldn't stop thinking about while I was watching these films again is that it took me back to being a kid when Enter the Matrix came out, and I used to play that game on PlayStation 2 like it was nobody's business. And in that game, you actually get a side story that, if I believe at the time, was meant to be canon, that you focus on the character of Ghost and Niobe, played by Jada Pinkett Smith and Anthony Brandon Wong. And yeah, you know, if you don't play that game, there's an element of Reloaded that is kind of missing in terms of its story, where they go off to do something onto the side that's kind of shown, but it's not really, you know, kind of laid out for you to really know what happened. And so it does feel like there's gaps in the stories from time to time, and if you play that game, it definitely fills in some of those gaps, which I just figured was something at least interesting to mention about the film. And it was kind of a nostalgic thing that kind of ported me back to being a kid and playing the living hell out of that game back in the day. So yeah, that's gonna be my overall thoughts on Reloaded and Revolutions. I think that there's definitely really good elements to the films. I think that visually there's a lot of really cool things. The performances are really good. I enjoy the world, but I think it gets a little bit overly convoluted at times. I think that it gets a little bit messy, and there are moments while watching it where I'm just thinking, why did that have to happen? Who are these characters, and why are we focusing on so many things going on? On top of that, you also have moments where the CGI and the green screen are definitely dated. It did come out in the early 2000s, and we've come very far in terms of CGI and cinematography, so there is that element. But I think the action still really holds up and kept me super engaged throughout. You also have a great score throughout all three of the original Matrix films that really does lead into a great score for the first film as well. And yeah, overall, I enjoyed rewatching Reloaded and Revolutions, but they're not amazing films. So without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on the latest installment in the series, and I am going to be avoiding spoilers since the film has just come out a few days ago, so no worries on that front. And yeah, Keanu Reeves, Carrie-Anne coming back to reprise their roles of Neo and Trinity, and you may be wondering how that is possible based on the way that the third film ends. And again, I won't be touching on anything spoilery, but if you've seen the promotional material for this movie, you know that Trinity's in the movie, you know that Neo's in the film, so that's no real surprise. And you also know that characters like Morpheus were recast, and I won't explain how that all kind of plays into the movie, but it does play a role in the story. And what I will say right out of the gate when it comes to this film is that it definitely had, better cinematography. There are elements about modern, filmmaking that they were definitely able to pull into this to make a really good looking Matrix film. But ultimately, I gotta say, this is probably my least favorite of the franchise. I found myself just kind of thinking that the film felt very hollow. There's a very meta approach to the way that they try to start this story that I wasn't crazy about. I appreciated what they were going for. It was kind of fun, but at the same time, it just didn't really feel like it flowed super well with what came before it, and it didn't really feel like it even flowed all that well with what we would see just later in this film. The later portion of Resurrection feels far more like a follow-up to the original three films than I feel like the early part of this movie. And so at times it felt a little bit disjointed, and by the time the film was over, there was an element of feeling like it just felt a little bit hollow, and that we were reaching certain points in the story without there really being too much to really feel like they were earned. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy the film. There's definitely a lot of great action sequences, and I will say the performances are really good throughout. You have Lana Wachowski, only one of the Wachowski siblings, coming back to actually direct this one, and yeah, I thought she did a good job in the director's chair. But what I will say kind of was lacking in this film for me was some of the writing. There is that element of having some dense dialogue from time to time, but I actually will praise this film in saying that I found it to be a little bit more focused than maybe the previous two installments in the series. However, by the time we got to the midway point and near the end, it just felt like we were kind of rushing to a finale that I don't necessarily know if I felt it was completely earned. There's also that element, like I mentioned, with like Morpheus, where you have actual multiple characters in this film who are reprised by different actors, and there's an explanation for it, but I'm not 100% sure I was really crazy about the explanation. And overall, it just kind of felt like this film wasn't 100% necessary. I am excited to see if they follow this up, if they can kind of expand on it a little bit more. But yeah, after having just binged the second, third, and fourth, I will say that, yeah, the first Matrix without a doubt is still the best in the series. I think that this new one, Resurrections, definitely has a lot of really great cinematography. There's some great action, but I don't really think that any of the action in this film really topped any of the moments from the first three films. And I would honestly say I don't think that there was any character moments or story beats or performances in this film that top anything that came in the first three films. So you ultimately have to ask yourself, is this one better than the first three films? And I don't think it is, even though I don't think the second and third are even that amazing in and of themselves. Overall, I enjoyed this universe. I enjoyed the look, the feel, the vibe. I enjoy a good sci-fi crazy movie, but sometimes I feel like the second, third, and the fourth film kind of indulge too much in trying to be overly clever and not really being all that clever really when you kind of lay it out and think about how it all panned out. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed a lot of the action. I enjoyed seeing these actors coming back to reprise roles in this film. And I think without a doubt, the best part of this film is Keanu and Carrie-Anne Moss. I really enjoyed their chemistry in the film, and all the scenes with them were with my favorite parts and the moments I was the most emotionally engaged. But there was a lot about this film that I really can't see myself being overly crazy about or wanting to revisit, not nearly as much as maybe the first three films. However, I think that this is a film that does kind of have its own place in the series. Again, I don't know how I feel necessarily about that earlier part of the film, but once it gets into feeling far more like a Matrix film, I think it does have, you know, a lot of potential to play off of those original films and create a really good story. So I think that this film will kind of have the benefit in hindsight if the next film is able to expand on what's happened here a lot better than I think that this one kind of did in and of itself. So that's going to be my thoughts on these films. Overall, I do enjoy them all. I think that they all have enjoyable elements, but they're just not films that I'm going to go ahead and be like, this is absolutely a must-see, you know, series, unfortunately, because I think that the first one is a must-see film, but the whole series isn't necessarily must-see in my eyes. But at the same time, I would say if you're going to watch the first one, watch the rest of them because it is an iconic series. But I almost feel pressured to say that because of how good the first one is. Does that make any sense? If you're a big fan of the first Matrix film, I think that you can kind of understand that the second, third, and fourth, I just don't feel like they're anywhere near as strong. But I think, you know, it's going to depend on the person. So that's just me rambling about Matrix 2, 3, and 4. Covered all of them now here on the channel. I do recommend you guys go and check out my video I did with Blacktastic Media. But for now, definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. Did you like this movie? Did you not like this movie? Specifically mentioning the newest one. And what do you guys think about the series overall? We'll just use this video to talk about the entirety of the Matrix saga. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. Please hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.